I met a human sniper a long time ago. Pray you never meet one. I still remember that war. It was many cycles ago, when the Zentri came upon our worlds like a plague. Before the invasion, my people had always valued peace and logic. We never imagined a day when we'd be forced to hold a weapon, let alone fight for our very survival. The Zentri, however, had no need for such ideals. They were a hive mind, relentless, cold, and unyielding. To them, we were merely another resource to conquer, another planet to absorb into their ever-expanding dominion. We were not warriors. At least, not then. Diplomacy, technology, reason, those were our strengths. But when the Zentri arrived, none of that mattered. Their swarm consumed everything. Their numbers were endless. Entire worlds fell within days, and for the first time in our history, we were truly afraid. That's when the coalition was formed, a desperate alliance of alien species, each one struggling to hold back the Zentri's tide. And then, of course, there were the humans. They were the last to join us. Most of us, my people included, knew little about them. They were a younger race, newly emerged from their homeworld. We viewed them as crude, unsophisticated. They lacked the technological refinement of other species. Their diplomacy? Blunt. Their ships? Far less advanced than ours. They seemed primitive. But they had a reputation, a growing one, even then, as fighters. Fierce, determined, and ruthless. Some whispered that they thrived in conflict, that war ran in their blood. I didn't believe it at the time. I thought it was exaggerated tales spun by those who didn't understand them. How wrong I was. Our encounter with a human sniper came at one of the darkest moments of the war. We were stationed on a barren, forsaken planet, just a tiny battalion, tasked with holding the line against the Zentri assault. There were so few of us, and so many of them. I had already accepted that we would likely die there. That we'd become another forgotten casualty in a war that was quickly becoming unwinnable. It was a desperate mission. The Zentri had outnumbered us 10-1, maybe more. Their forces swarmed over the horizon like a black tide. My people, despite our logical minds and advanced weaponry, were no match for the sheer brutality and numbers of the Zentri. We were scattered, disoriented, already beginning to fall. Then came the human. They called him Phantom. He arrived with little fanfare, just a single human sniper assigned to our unit as support. I remember the moment he joined us. He was quiet, deliberate, not at all what I expected. He carried a rifle, an actual projectile weapon. To my people, it seemed archaic, almost laughable. We had long since moved beyond such primitive tools. Energy weapons, plasma, those were the instruments of modern warfare. A rifle? A simple bullet? It seemed like a joke. I remember exchanging glances with my comrades, sharing silent skepticism. How could one human, with such an outdated weapon, make any difference against the Zentri horde? We scoffed, thinking this human was as foolish as the stories we'd heard about their kind. It wasn't long before we were proven wrong. The Zentri forces were closing in fast. We could hear their footsteps, thousands of them, approaching like a storm. I remember the tension in the air, the panic setting in among our ranks. Our advanced scanners, our technology, none of it could stem the fear we felt. But Phantom, the human sniper, he remained still. Unmoving. Watching. Waiting. I couldn't see him clearly at first. He had already begun blending into the terrain, positioning himself in the shadows. He was utterly calm, as if the chaos around us didn't touch him. And then, without warning, the first shot rang out. It was a sound unlike any of our energy weapons, sharp, distinct. A single crack. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. And then one of the Zentri commanders, leading the charge, dropped to the ground. Dead. One shot. One kill. It was so precise, so surgical, that it took me a moment to even process what had happened. I looked at Phantom in disbelief. How could a human do this? How could they be so calm, so focused in the middle of such a hopeless situation? I was shaken, my people were shaken, but the human? He simply reloaded, repositioned, and disappeared back into the landscape, like a ghost. The Zentari hesitated. It was the first time I had ever seen them pause, even for a moment. In their hive mind, the loss of a commander shouldn't have mattered. And yet, somehow it did. Phantom's rifle had disrupted their rhythm, their flow. It was as if a single human with a primitive weapon had caused a fracture in their collective mind. It didn't make sense. It still doesn't, not fully. But in that moment, I understood something fundamental about humans, something we had all overlooked. It wasn't about their technology, or lack thereof. It wasn't about their diplomacy, or their methods. It was about their resolve. Their focus. Their ability to change the course of a battle with nothing more than a single shot. We all felt it then. The shift in the air. The realization that, somehow, against all odds, we might have a chance. And it was because of that human, because of the sniper who moved like a shadow and struck like a predator. I had never seen anything like it. We were losing. There was no question about it. The Zentari were bearing down on us, relentless, wave after wave. Their precision was frightening, each movement perfectly calculated, each strike coordinated by their hive mind. We had no answer for it. Our weapons, our tactics, our technology, it all seemed useless in the face of their sheer numbers and overwhelming coordination. I could hear the panic in the voices of my comrades, a sound I was not accustomed to. Logic and reason had always been our guiding principles, but in that moment, they were being replaced by fear. The Zentari were closing in fast. I could feel it. Our lines were scattered, disorganized, barely holding on. Explosions shook the ground, and I could hear the shrill cries of my fellow soldiers falling under the enemy's relentless assault. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone, the signature of our failing energy weapons. We had thought we were prepared. We had thought technology would save us. But as the Zentari pressed forward, it became clear that we had vastly underestimated the situation. We were running out of time. That's when he arrived. The human sniper. We barely noticed him at first. He moved so quietly, blending into the chaos, like he was part of the landscape. We knew his codename, Phantom, but beyond that, he was a mystery. I remember looking at him, standing there with his rifle, and wondering what good he could possibly do. A rifle? A projectile weapon? In this day and age? It seemed absurd, like sending a stone to stop a tidal wave. My comrades felt the same. I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Some even laughed, bitter, hopeless laughter. We all thought the same thing. How could one human, with such an outdated weapon, stand against the Zentari? They were an army. He was just a single soldier, with nothing but a rifle that fired tiny pieces of metal. It didn't make sense. Then came the first shot. It was almost imperceptible. Just a quiet crack, lost in the noise of the battlefield. At first, I didn't even register what had happened. But then I saw it. One of the Zentari commanders, dead, dropped in his tracks. No explosion, no flash of energy. Just gone. A perfect, precise shot, delivered from a distance that seemed impossible. It took me a moment to process what I had just witnessed. I wasn't the only one. My comrades went silent, their disbelief palpable. We stared at the fallen commander, then back at Phantom, trying to reconcile what we had just seen. The shot had been impossibly clean, as if the human had taken his time, calculated every variable, wind, distance, gravity, without the need for any advanced tech or targeting systems. It was as if the sniper sensed the battlefield in a way none of us could comprehend. The Zentari hesitated. For the first time, I saw them falter, even if just for a moment. Their hive mind shouldn't have cared about the loss of one commander, but somehow they did. It was as if that one shot had pierced through their collective focus, causing them to hesitate, to reconsider. It wasn't just a kill, it was a disruption. I watched Phantom carefully after that. My initial skepticism began to fade, replaced by something else, curiosity, yes, but also fear. There was something unnerving about how calm he was. Amid the chaos, with death all around, he didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He simply repositioned, melted into the shadows, and waited. He was patient. Patient in a way that made the rest of us, even in our logical minds, uncomfortable. He seemed detached, almost inhuman in his focus. Then came the second shot. Another commander down. Again, just a single crack, almost too quiet to notice, but the result was the same. Another Zenthari leader, eliminated with surgical precision. I felt a chill run through me. This was no ordinary soldier. The way he moved, the way he seemed to blend into the environment, always finding the perfect position without being seen, there was something ghostly about it. It was no wonder they called him Phantom. The Zenthari forces, once so organized and unstoppable, began to falter. It was subtle at first, just small pauses, brief moments of hesitation. But in a hive mind, those moments spread quickly. The loss of their commanders wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. They were beginning to break. I glanced around at my comrades. They were just as stunned as I was. We had been prepared to die here, certain that nothing could save us from the Zenthari's onslaught. And yet this human, this single, quiet sniper, was changing the course of the battle with nothing more than patience and precision. I felt a growing sense of dread. Not of the Zenthari anymore, but of Phantom. There was something deeply unsettling about him. He was too calm, too deliberate. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to explain himself. He just acted. And with each act, the Zenthari crumbled a little more. I couldn't help but wonder, how many battles had this human fought? How many times had he done this, slipped into a battlefield and quietly dismantled the enemy one shot at a time? And how many more would he fight, always unseen, always moving like a ghost? I no longer doubted him. But that realization came with its own weight. I realized then that the stories about humans, about their ferocity, their skill in combat, weren't exaggerations. They were true. I saw it with my own eyes. And now, I couldn't shake the thought, if one human could do this, what could an entire army of them accomplish? Phantom took another shot. Another Zenthari commander fell. And with it, the last shred of my skepticism vanished. We had laughed at the idea of a human sniper, mocked the simplicity of his weapon. But in the end, it was his calm, his focus, and his unrelenting precision that had saved us. The Zenthari were breaking, retreating in disarray. And Phantom? He disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving behind only the bodies of his enemies and the quiet, lingering fear he had instilled in all of us. I no longer knew whether to be grateful for his presence, or terrified of what he represented. I'd never seen anyone move the way he did. Or rather, not move. Phantom was more than just a soldier. He was a specter, a wraith that haunted the battlefield. It was eerie, unnerving. We were used to hearing the thrum of energy weapons, the thunder of explosions, the chaos of battle all around us. But from Phantom? Nothing. Only silence. Deadly, precise silence. His first kills had shaken the Zenthari, but that was only the beginning. What came next was a systematic dismantling of their command structure. Phantom wasn't like the rest of us, firing wildly, hoping to hold back the enemy tide. No, he was methodical. Each shot was deliberate. Calculated. I could almost hear the seconds ticking by as he lined up each target in his scope. First, the Zenthari commanders. Their loss had thrown the hive into disarray, but it didn't stop there. Phantom moved on to their communication officers next, those who relayed orders and coordinated attacks. Without them, the Zenthari were blind, unable to organize their forces with the same efficiency that had made them so deadly before. I never saw him move from one position to the next. None of us did. It was like he vanished after each shot, only to reappear somewhere else. A few of my comrades tried to track him at first, hoping to learn something from his methods, but they gave up quickly. It was impossible to follow him. One moment he was there, the next gone. He never left a trace, no footprints, no sound, nothing. Just another shot, another Zenthari falling to the ground, and Phantom slipping away into the shadows. The Zenthari felt it too. They began to stumble, their movements no longer fluid and precise. They were faltering, unsure. I could see the confusion spreading through their ranks, the fear beginning to take root in a species that had never known it. They were a hive mind, driven by unity and purpose. But now, that unity was being shattered, piece by piece, by one human they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't touch. The battlefield was changing, not because of us, but because of him. Phantom was turning the tide, not through brute force, but through fear. The Zentari, these creatures who had conquered worlds without hesitation, were hesitating. Their hive mind was splintering under the weight of their losses, unable to comprehend the ghost that was hunting them. It was like watching a predator stalk its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Phantom. Phantom was the ultimate predator. What unnerved me most was his patience. I'd never seen anything like it. We were used to the rush of battle, the chaos that forced split-second decisions. But Phantom? He could wait for hours. Days even. Perfectly still, completely silent. He would watch and observe, calculating every variable, the wind, the distance, the slightest movement of his target. It was terrifying how he didn't seem to need any of the advanced technology that we relied on. No targeting systems, no scanning equipment. Just a rifle and his eyes. The more I watched him work, the more I realized that this wasn't just skill. It was instinct. Humans, we'd come to learn, were strange creatures. In many ways, they seemed simple, primitive even. But in war, they were something else entirely. It was like they had a natural understanding of the battlefield, an ability to read it, sense it, and adapt to it in ways that we, with all our logic and technology, couldn't comprehend. Phantom shots came with a rhythm, slow and deliberate. And every time, another key Zentari figure fell. Communication officers, heavy infantry, anyone who could stabilize their forces was eliminated. The Zentari didn't stand a chance. But as much as they were falling apart, we weren't immune to the fear either. We started to fear him too. He was our ally, yes, but there was something unsettling about him. The way he moved or didn't move. The way he killed without hesitation, without emotion. There was a coldness to his efficiency that made even the bravest among us uneasy. It wasn't just that he was good at what he did, it was the fact that he seemed more like a machine than a man. A predator, stalking his prey with cold calculation. And the way he disappeared after each shot, it was as if he wasn't even human anymore. He was something else. Something beyond us. Some of my comrades whispered that Phantom wasn't just a code name, it was who he truly was. A ghost, a phantom, haunting the battlefield. I began to believe it myself. One night, in a rare moment of quiet, I tried to approach him. I didn't know what I was hoping to gain, a conversation, maybe some insight into how he worked. But when I found him, crouched low in the shadows, his rifle resting against his shoulder, he didn't speak. He barely even looked at me. Just a glance, nothing more. In that glance, though, I saw something. Behind the cold, emotionless exterior, I saw the weight he carried. The exhaustion. The burden of being what he was. A killer, yes, but a human one. For all his inhuman abilities, there was still something there, deep within, that reminded me he wasn't just a ghost. He was flesh and blood, and that made him all the more terrifying. He didn't say a word. Just gave me that brief look before turning back to his scope. Within seconds he had melted back into the shadows, gone before I could even process what had happened. That was the last time I ever tried to speak to him. I realized then that there was nothing I could understand about him. Nothing I could say that would bridge the gap between us. We were fighting the same battle, but Phantom was on a different plane altogether. He wasn't just fighting the Zentari. He was hunting them, and with each passing moment, they were becoming more and more like prey. And that was his greatest weapon, not the rifle, not his skill, but the fear he instilled in all of us. The Zentari were breaking, and so were we. Because we knew, deep down, that Phantom was more than a soldier. He was a ghost in the shadows. And whether you were enemy or ally, you never truly wanted to meet him. We'd just finished clearing out another wave of Zentari when the new orders came through. I remember the grim looks on my comrades' faces as the message was relayed. Our mission was about to change. The command was simple. We were to eliminate the Zenthree's Hive Queen. It was the only way to cripple their forces completely, to shatter the hive mind. Without her, they'd fall apart. But we all knew what that really meant. The Hive Queen was hidden deep behind enemy lines, protected by layers of defenses, and surrounded by legions of Zentree soldiers. The idea of getting anywhere near her was laughable. No unit had ever come close. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The kind of order given when command had run out of options and needed to throw bodies at an impossible target. I'd resigned myself to the fact that this was the end. My comrades shared my thoughts. Defeat was practically written on their faces. But Phantom? He didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. The orders came in, and he simply accepted them. In that moment, I realized something important about him. He didn't fear death. Or maybe, he just didn't care about it anymore. While the rest of us stood there, paralyzed by the grim reality of our situation, Phantom was already planning. I watched him carefully as he studied the battlefield, scanning the distant horizon with those sharp, calculating eyes of his. I'd seen him do this before, but this time was different. This time, we were up against the Queen herself. I couldn't help myself. "You really think you can pull this off?" I asked him. He didn't answer. He just continued surveying the area, his mind already 1,000 miles ahead of mine. His silence wasn't meant to be dismissive, it was just who he was. I could tell he was already working through every variable, every factor that needed to align for this impossible shot. He selected a vantage point, high and far away, with a line of sight so narrow that I doubted anyone could make the shot, not even him. The Queen was nestled deep within her protective cocoon of defenses, hidden behind multiple layers of cover. It didn't matter how good a marksman he was, no one could shoot through that. Not from this distance. But Phantom? He was resolute. His body language never changed. He didn't give in to doubt like the rest of us. The plan was in motion, and we followed him, because we had no choice but to believe. Or maybe it was that we couldn't come up with any other plan. The Zentree were closing in around us, as they always did, relentless, unyielding. Our unit was doing everything it could to hold them off, but this time, the pressure was different. Every second brought us closer to the moment of truth. And every second, the tension was growing unbearable. I kept watching Phantom. He was perfectly still, lying in the dirt with his rifle propped against a jagged rock. His eyes never left his target. He'd been waiting like that for hours, silent and patient, barely even moving. There was no hurry in his actions, no rush. It was as if the chaos around him didn't even exist. He had positioned himself miles away, far beyond what any of our energy weapons could reach. His rifle, so crude and primitive in comparison to our technology, was his only tool. I couldn't understand how he intended to make this work. The wind was shifting constantly, the terrain was uneven, and the Queen was hidden so deep that there were only brief moments when she was even visible through the cracks in the Zentree defense lines. But Phantom, he was waiting. Waiting for that perfect moment. I could feel the weight of the tension in the air, growing thicker with every second that passed. My heart was pounding, my pulse racing, but he was steady. Unshakable. Then it happened. The wind stilled for just a moment, and the Queen's cocoon opened for the briefest of seconds, revealing her dark, grotesque form. It was barely a glimpse, nothing more than a fraction of a second, but for Phantom, it was all he needed. I heard the crack of the rifle, sharp and sudden. The sound was so out of place in the middle of the battle, where energy weapons buzzed and hummed. It was different. More final. I watched the bullet leave the barrel, a speck in the distance, moving faster than I could track. The impossible shot had been fired. The bullet sailed through the air, threading its way between obstacles and past countless Zentree soldiers. It was as if the universe itself bent around Phantom's will, guiding the projectile on its path. Time seemed to stretch out, and for that brief moment, I forgot everything else happening around me. All I could do was watch. And then, in the distance, I saw it, the Hive Queen's body jerking violently, collapsing. She didn't even have time to react. One perfect shot, straight through the center of her twisted, alien form. She was dead before her guards even realized what had happened. The Zenthree's reaction was immediate. Panic. Disarray. Without their queen, they were lost. Their hive mind fractured, their coordination shattered. What had once been an unstoppable force crumbled in an instant. Soldiers ran in different directions, confused, leaderless. Their assault fell apart as they tried to flee the battlefield, their cohesion gone. We stood there in stunned silence. The battle was over, but none of us could quite believe what we had just witnessed. I looked over at Phantom, but he was already gone, his rifle and form disappearing into the haze of dust and smoke, leaving no trace behind. For all our technology, all our advances, it was a single human, with nothing but his rifle and his instincts, who had changed the course of the war. It was something I still couldn't fully comprehend, even as the Zenthri collapsed around us. The impossible had been made real, and it was the work of one man. Phantom had done it. He'd ended the war in a single shot. And then, just like that, he was gone. The war didn't end in a day, but that shot, that moment, was the turning point. The Zenthri, once so unstoppable, began to crumble after the death of their queen. Their hive minds splintered. What had once been a precise, cohesive force of destruction devolved into chaos. The coalition pressed forward, driving the Zenthri back across every front. Victories started to stack up in our favor, and for the first time, we saw a real chance at survival. But I knew deep down that none of this would have happened without him. One human, with nothing more than his rifle and his silence, had done more for the coalition than entire fleets of ships, more than thousands of soldiers. The war had turned not because of grand strategies or technological superiority, but because of a single shot from a sniper most of us had never even seen properly. Humanity. At the time, we didn't think much of them. Crude. Backward. Less advanced. Sure, they joined the coalition, and we'd heard rumors of their resilience, their toughness. But we had always thought it was their numbers or their willingness to throw themselves into the fray that made them valuable in battle. We were wrong. It wasn't their numbers or their brute force that made them dangerous. It was their adaptability. Their willingness to embrace risk. Their ability to understand the mind of the enemy, to exploit fear in ways no machine could ever calculate. In our logic-driven minds, we couldn't comprehend how one individual could make such an impact, but humans? It's what they thrive on. They see chaos, and where others see certain defeat, they see opportunity. I began to understand why they were feared, even among our own allies. Their technology wasn't as advanced as ours, no, but it didn't matter. They didn't need it. They had something far more potent. The ability to strike not just at the body, but at the mind. Phantom, that sniper who had walked into our unit like a ghost, had shown me that humanity was something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. After the Queen fell, the stories of Phantom spread. Soldiers across the coalition began to tell tales of the human sniper who could turn the tide of any battle with a single bullet. Some said he was a myth, a specter we conjured up in our minds to give us hope. Others claimed they had seen him in other battles, picking off enemies with that ancient, primitive rifle of his. But no one could ever confirm his whereabouts. He had vanished, just as he'd appeared, without a trace. The war ended, but the legend of the sniper grew. I remember sitting with other veterans years later, discussing those dark days. We'd speak of strategies, of commanders, of fleets and armadas. But no story ever garnered more attention than the sniper. The fear in people's eyes whenever his name was brought up, it never faded. Even those who hadn't been there, those who'd only heard the stories secondhand, spoke of him with reverence. I sometimes wonder what became of him. Did he retire? Did he slip back into the human ranks, becoming just another face among their soldiers? Or did he continue his work, moving from one battle to the next, leaving behind only death and confusion in his wake? And then, sometimes, I think that maybe he never existed at all. That maybe we needed something, someone, to believe in during those dark days. A symbol of defiance. A legend who could do the impossible. But I know what I saw. I remember that shot. I remember the way he moved, like a shadow passing through the chaos of war, untouched and unseen. I know what he was capable of. Now, all these years later, I still hear whispers of him. On distant planets, in the far reaches of the galaxy, the stories persist. The human sniper. The ghost. Always watching, always waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He became more than just a soldier. He became a warning. And now, as I sit here, far from the battlefield, surrounded by the trappings of peace, I feel compelled to pass that warning along. You see, I met a human sniper a long time ago. And I will never forget him. I don't know where he is now, or if he's even still alive. But one thing is certain, if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of a human sniper, you won't know it until it's too late. So listen to me carefully, because I know what I'm talking about. Pray you never meet one. It's a quiet galaxy now, but I'll always remember the silence he left behind after that final shot. The kind of silence that lingers long after the battle is over, reminding you that, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the armies or the fleets that you should fear. It's the individual. The one who can slip in and out of the shadows, unseen and unheard. The one who can change the course of a war with a single pull of the trigger. And in all the vastness of this galaxy, there's no one more terrifying than a human sniper. That I promise you.